The story that I'm going to tell you today has to do with a beverage and its many varieties, namely beer. And it begins in my teenage years in the 80s and extends all the way into my late 30s. I could say, you could even say a little bit beyond that. Not so much me brewing beer at that point, but helping somebody else out with doing so. And it's something that I've considered going back to before in the past. Probably won't anytime soon, but it's something to kick around. And so what is this about? Well, I got into home brewing in the early 1990s and then took it up again in the 2000s. And so I got to begin a little bit earlier in the 1980s. So, I grew up here in Wisconsin in you could call it the greater Milwaukee area. And, most of our parents drank beer of one sort or another. It was a very popular beverage. Most of the beers that you'd get at that time are what we call American Pilsners, which are like Pilsners, but considerably watered down, right? Maybe with a decent amount of hops, but not an awful lot of body. Light beers were becoming popular at the time as well, which even further watered things down. And there were a wide range of them. I mean, tons of them were made here in Milwaukee or in other parts of Wisconsin. Miller Genuine Draft came out while we were in high school, and that was our favorite one to get our hands on, for parties and bonfires and camping trips and all that sort of stuff. When, of course, we weren't of age to drink, but it was very, widespread, and you could usually find some sort of adult who would buy you beer, or you had a friend who would get some. And, there were quite a few occasions to do that. And so you would drink it, and at first it didn't taste that great, but you developed a taste for it fairly quickly. And that was our sort of world. We didn't know much about the wide range of possible beers that you could drink. And then I went in the Army, and I got stationed in southern Germany in, not actually in a town, but about 2 miles out of a town called Fürth. And my very first time out on the economy, as we called it, meaning you go off a post, a friend of mine took me to a restaurant, and in addition to having schnitzel, which was awesome, I had Tucker Hefeweizen, and that was like a taste revelation to me. I was like, whoa, this is awesome stuff, right? And then we'd drink all sorts of other beers as well. And sometimes you had friends who actually lived off post because they were married, and they would buy beer on the economy. And you could buy beer on post as well, at the PX or at the, I forget the name of the club that we had on post. And then, of course, there were all sorts of bars everywhere. And so I picked up a taste while I was over in Germany for good beer. I tried a lot of different types. And then I came back here to Wisconsin. I got out in the budget cuts in 1990, so I was only 20 years old when I got here. And then, but most of my friends were older because I hung out with an older crowd. And, we started buying local beers and some international beers and tasting them, like Guinness Extra Stout. And, we had the Sprecher Brewery here, which is one of the first craft breweries in the United States that was doing so commercial, and we had the Black Bavarian, the Amber, and so we're getting introduced to cooler kinds of beer. And by the time that I was in college, you had all sorts of interesting things coming on the market. Leinenkugel's, which is a Wisconsin brewery, they had brought out a couple different types. So we had Sprecher, Leinenkugel's. There was Killian's, which people were into, and there were a whole bunch of others. And you could go to special grocery stores or liquor stores and buy imported beer, right? So you get Bass Pale Ale and Old Peculiar and all these other cool things. So that's going on. And I'm in college by now, and my sophomore year, I was living in what was called the Honors Suite. And it was 4 rooms together, and each one of us had an individual room, which was really great because I didn't like having a roommate. And, you had a decent-sized room with a good closet. And I'm not sure exactly where I got the idea. I think reconstructing it, it was probably that I picked up the complete guide to home brewing at Walden Books because my girlfriend at the time was working there, and read through it, and I was like, I think I want to do this. So we drove down to Milwaukee. I remember that, and I remember going to this beer and wine making supply store, and they, everything was laid out, and you got the different packages of malt and different hops and specialty grains and all the things you need to get started, including like the bottle, cap thing that you have to put on there. So I had to buy everything at that time because I knew it was going to be a while before I came back down. And in my dorm room, not in some big, kettle that I used later on, but in a hot pot that I think held only at best like, maybe a quart or a quart and a half. I did the laborious process of boiling the hops, putting them into the big, essentially white garbage bucket that you use as your primary fermenter, and then, boiling what is called the wort, which is the malt in the water. And you got to be really careful with that because it has a tendency to boil over. So you have to watch it kind of like a hawk and turn the stuff down. And, anyway, a big, long process, right? And then it's in this bucket, and you add more water to it, and then you put the lid on, and pretty soon it starts fermenting. And then after that, you got to siphon it into this giant carboy, a big glass thing with kind of a smaller lip on top, and you put this seal on that has like a little lock that the bubbles can come out and stuff. And there were, some kind of misadventures with this. Sometimes it's fermenting too quick and the bubbles you can see the hops coming up through the bubbles and stuff like that. And you could smell it and you could hear it, right? This constant bloop, 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 bloop as it's going on. I hid it in my closet just so, because you weren't allowed to like ferment beverages on campus. But anyway, that's what I did. And I did this, a couple times and brewed some decent batches of beer. I never had any of them go bad on me or anything. And it was, tasty stuff. Managed to bottle them, leave them for a while, let them ferment in the bottles, then pour it out. And then my suite mate, Joel Haas, got into it. And he and I were buddies in part because, I was ex-Army, he was ex-Marines. I knew his sister, Faith, from having lived in the French suite with her the semester before. And, we were very compatible. And he liked beer too, like pretty much all of us. And he was like, man, I want to do this. And he wanted to get a little bit more elaborate with it, and he actually did have one batch that did go bad. We had to pour it out, 5 gallons at a time, right? But he wanted to do stuff like lagering, and, I stuck to ales, things that are pretty simple, hard to screw up. He wanted to do more advanced stuff, and I was like, well, that's cool, you do your thing and I'll do my thing, and we'll swap back and forth. And he made some decent beers, and I made some decent beers as well. And this went on during that year, and then after a while, I got kind of tired of it, and I was like, this is a lot of work. I can just as easily buy the beer that I want. And I gave all my equipment to Joel, and that was it for a long, long time. I finished undergraduate, moved down here to Milwaukee, worked a year, went to graduate school, and then after graduate school, I moved my little family to my big family's land in Indiana that I've talked about in other videos. And we had Uncle Hubert and Aunt Teresa's house, the house that they had built in the 1970s. We took it over, and there was an unfinished basement, but one that had a stove and a sink and actually a big locker that we could put stuff in, sort of like a wall locker in the Army, about 6 feet high and I think about 4 feet wide, just big enough to put a lot of cases of beer into, right? And so I decided that I wanted to start homebrewing again. I wanted to try it out. I wanted to be kind of a craftsman. So I got myself a big, cauldron, and I went and purchased the equipment again. And by this time, there was a place that was fairly near to where we lived. And, I was working at Indiana State Prison at the time, which was an hour drive. And I could make a slight detour onto Route 6, and then there was a place that I could go to. And homebrewing had advanced considerably since then. So the kinds of products that were available. It widened all these cool specialty grains and malts, and then the regular malts and all these different hops. And so I started brewing, and it went pretty good. What you do, now I could actually take a giant kettle and do the malt, and I also did the hops separately in like a big pan or a pot rather. And what was really fun with this is I actually brought my kid in. At that time the only kid, Kat, my oldest kid. And we had a great time. Kat would help me. It turned it into almost like an apprenticing process. And they don't remember it because it was, quite a long time ago. But, Kat would help me measure out the different grains and put them into the boiling water and, smell the hops. Ooh, these smell really spicy, right? And it was like a whole process that we did together for making the wort and then the primary fermentation. And Kat would even help me sometimes with siphoning, into the secondary fermenter, or putting it into the bottles, right, and stuff like that. Obviously, Kat wasn't going to be drinking any of this sort of stuff, but it was fun for us to do anyway. And I bottled a lot of beer, enough to actually over time fill up that whole wall locker, because you can age beers and you can let them sit for a while, and not all of them improve with that. And you can't let it sit 5-10 years and hope that you're going to have anything special happening. But a year or so, sometimes it really improves the brew. So you make something and you're like, not great. Let's put it in there for a while. And I was drinking cases of beer, or actually I was buying beer by the case. I wasn't drinking like a whole case in a day, but I would buy Corona, and I would buy Beck's and a few other ones, and then I would use those bottles, reuse the bottles, right? And you just buy bottle caps, and you got a bottle capper, and you put them on, and then make sure, of course, you label what the beer is. And then I sat down just a bit earlier to try to remember all the different things that I actually made over the years. And I would, kind of cycle through these and try new things out. So I always loved India Pale Ales. I made quite a few of those. I also made pale ales, sort of like Bass. I made bitters, where it's a bit more hoppy, but not that high of an alcohol content. I made brown ales, where you've got a bit more dark malt and, crystal malt and chocolate malt in there as well. I made a lot of milds, which are super cheap and easy to make. It's not very alcoholic, but it's got a good taste to it, I made quite a few stouts. I was getting pretty good at that. And I even made quite a few porters. And a porter is sort of like a stout, except think about even more going into it. They're expensive to make in part because lots of hops, lots of specialty grain, lots of malt, high alcohol content. Those are the ones that you actually can age for a while, and they improve by the aging process. As I discovered when I forgot about a whole bunch of porter in the bottom of the locker, and then rediscovered it later on and cracked it open. I was like, holy crap, this is pretty amazing. I also made mead just as sort of an experiment. Never got really good at mead making, but my relatives liked it. I'd take it to the family reunion and put it in the auction or things like that. It was always kind of a big draw. And then I made 2 interesting specialty beers. And I might have made others, but I couldn't remember if I'd done any others. So one, northern Indiana, lots and lots of blueberries. So I was like, well, let's do a blueberry beer where I'll, make a normal beer, but I'll add a whole bunch of blueberries to it. And of course it came out purple. And it was, it was okay. And it was one of those things where I was like, let's put these aside. And about a year later, it was pretty awesome. Something had happened, and it turned out really good. I also experimented with spruce beer because we had a big spruce tree outside. And spruce is sort of like pine. It's a conifer, right? And in the old days, it wasn't always hops that got used for the bittering agent. Spruce was sometimes used for that as well. So I made some spruce beer, and it turned out pretty good. You don't want to put too much of the spruce needles in it, right? But it was satisfactory. And I would share these with my uncles and, friends who came over, and it was a lot of enjoyment that I took in that. And then at a certain point, my uncle's cousin was getting into home brewing, and I was getting kind of bored with it after a while. I had other stuff I wanted to be focusing on, and so I gave my equipment to him and gave him some basic instructions on how to do it, and he took it from there. And that was it for me for home brewing for quite a while. But I did in the while I was down at Fayetteville State University from 2008 to 2011. I had a friend who was the chair of the communications department, and I think it was probably, I want to say about maybe 2010, he started getting interested in homebrewing. Now, he was going to do it in a way that was much more intensive, where you don't just buy all the stuff basically pre-roasted and stuff like that. He wanted to get his own grains and malt them and stuff like that. And I was like, oh man, that's a lot of work. But if you want to do it, more power to you. I don't know that you're going to make that much of a better beer as a result, but hey, you got the time, you got the place, you got the space to do it, and you've got the interest, so go ahead and knock yourself out. And so I helped him out with the first couple batches in his kitchen, not doing the roast your own grains or stuff like that. Just doing the stuff that you'd buy at the store. And you could buy it there locally in Fayetteville. By that time, home brewing was very common. And, stuff turned out good. And they kept on improving. I think he might still be doing it. I don't know. We've lost touch over the years. But it's something that I really took some enjoyment in. You don't have to, be super smart or super ambitious or anything to do a decent job making your own beer. And that's what I did. It was kind of something to do on the weekends every once in a while. And you could take pride in your own work and taste the effects of what you had done. So I may get into it someday down the line, but probably not. I'm content now. Actually, I drink non-alcoholic beers, and there's so many good ones out there that it's not really hard to find them, including many versions of beers that I like that are now available. Guinness has a great non-alcoholic version, so does Heineken. But it was a very interesting and fun chapter of my life. I enjoyed the product an awful lot, so I thought I would share that little story with you.